And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, today's sea ice analysis showing still some thinner ice here just west of Kotzebue, and it's a little heavier there from Kivalina up toward Cape Lisburne area. Otherwise, not a lot of change here in the overall picture of things. Although this area up here that was a little more open a couple of days ago now is kind of pinching off a little bit there. Otherwise, going on to tonight's weather again, rain here, Seward Peninsula down the west coast, Nunivak Island to the Pribilofs, into the eastern Aleutians with a weak trough there. And chance of rain or snow showers with a weak low off the western Arctic coast. Mostly dry, variably cloudy across southern Alaska, increasing chances of rain along the North Gulf Coast. Stays kind of wet for the east side of Kodiak Island, but nothing heavy. Increasing chances of showers along the north coast of the Panhandle with a general increase in the cloudiness there. And for tomorrow, that front edges eastward farther there, so that'll bring some rain into the southeastern areas. Wet for the North Gulf Coast, southern Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Wet here over the western interior from the southern slopes of the Brooks Range right on down to the Alaska Peninsula. And weak warm front out over the western Bering Sea has, there we go, finally a low center comes onto the map out here. So I'll pick the winds up here over the western Aleutians, bring some good IFR into the Adak-Atka area, some light rain. A little bit better conditions off to the east. There are some weak high pressure over the southeast Bering. Stays wet and cool here over the western part of the state down to Kodiak Island. Warmer over the interior. Temperatures recover a little bit as we get a little more sunshine going, especially for the north slope areas. Isolated showers over the mountainous terrain. Light rain here from the eastern North Gulf Coast. Rain and showers cooler for the southeast coast. For the coastal water forecast here for the south coast, south winds 10 to 15 knots for Tuesday. North coast east-southeast winds at 20 knots. Seas at about 6 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, southeast winds at 10 knots. Northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait. And for the day on Wednesday, south winds 20 knots, Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage, south at 15 for Lynn Canal. South winds 15 knots here for the south coast, and the north coast east-southeasterlies 15 knots. Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots on Tuesday, Cook Inlet. Tuesday winds from the south-southwest at about 10 knots with 2-foot seas. East 15 knots for Kamishak Bay, but small craft advisories for the Barren Islands. East winds 25 knots. East-northeast winds at 20 knots for the North Gulf Coast. And then for Wednesday, variable winds from the North Gulf Coast at 10 to 15 knots. Light easterlies at 10 knots for Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots for Cook Inlet, east winds 15 to 20 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Kodiak Island for Tuesday, northeasterlies 15 to 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, and Bristol Bay, lighter winds there from the south at about 10 knots. And then for Wednesday, Bristol Bay, those winds kick up from the southeast to about 20 knots with 3-foot seas. Alaska Peninsula, west and northwest winds 15 to 20 knots. Kodiak Island, east winds at 15 knots. Eastern Aleutians, actually from Adak eastward there at Unalaska Island, west winds mostly at around 20 knots. And for the western Aleutians, we've got some a little bit windier, not too much though, west-southwest at 20 to 25 knots. Then for Wednesday, a bigger increase in the wind. Small craft advisories now for the western Aleutians, west-southwest winds at 25 to 30 knots. Adak and Atka, south at 15 to 20 knots. Eastern Aleutians, west-northwest winds, 15 to 20 knots. For the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, southwest winds at 25 knots. Light northwest breeze at 10 knots for the Yukon Delta coast. Light variable winds here for St. Lawrence Island into Norton Sound. Northwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island, and the Pribilofs west at 15 with 4-foot seas. Outlook for Wednesday, Pribilof Islands, west winds 15 knots, seas 5 feet, southwest 15 for St. Matthew Island, and all northerly, Norton Sound, north at 10, St. Lawrence Island, and the southwest coast, all looking at north winds at 15 knots, seas running 2 to 4 feet. Eastern and central Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, small craft or actually brisk wind advisories, east at 25 knots. Northeast at 15 knots with 2-foot seas for the western Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea. Northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Wednesday, Chukchi Sea, north to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Brisk wind advisories here for the central and east central Arctic coast out of the east at 25 knots. Small craft advisories for the western Arctic coast. And over toward Kaktovik, Barter Island, at Demarcation Point, winds will be from the east at 20 knots.